Welcome back to the channel, my friends. I hope you are doing well. Today one of the most popular vehicles of World War II, and in this episode I will show you how I built it. The border set is not the newest product on store shelves, but it seems pretty good to use to build a quite cool model. I got this particular set as a gift from one of my super patrons, for which I thank you very much, Karsten. From the very beginning I planned it in a winter version with shields on the turret and white tracks, so to enrich the final look I will add a photo etch set of side skirts by Griffon model, winter curtains prepared by Quick Tracks, 3 sets of lovely modeling jewelry by Master model, Eureka XXL towing ropes and hooks for the hull and turret by Pz.IV, which I forgot to show here. To start with, I marked all the frames in a very visible way, which definitely speeds up finding them while working on the model. A trivially simple trick, but completely effective. I recommend it. And to be fair to the viewers, I have to say that if you expect to see all the parts being glued together, you probably won't find it in my video. I will focus more on the additional work I did and the elements I used to create this miniature. I drilled the ramrod element, which is prepared as a one piece at the ends. Not much of it is visible after adding it to the hull wall, but it's worth doing it, if only for your own satisfaction. It takes 5 minutes, of course, if you have the right drills. All the edges were smoothed with thin modeling glue. The entire suspension of the tank is based on 8 bogies and 16 road wheels. It's best to build them in series because then we do it faster. In this model, assembling all the elements of the chassis took me a little longer than an hour, so quite efficiently for such an extensive construction. Moving higher, I dealt with the tools. In the past, the tools required the preparation of photo-etched clamps. Now they are so well prepared that the only replacement I sometimes use is to remove the plastic ones and insert 3D printed clamps, which takes much less time and is less stressful than assembling working elements that no one would open later anyway. In this model I used what the producer prepared because it's good enough. The road wheels, or more precisely the rubber wheel rims, were slightly damaged. This is completely normal in these elements, and regardless of whether it's a vehicle from World War II or a modern one, it looks identical. The most important thing is to be moderate and random in damaging the edges. I have already mentioned that for this model I used winter curtains from Quick Tracks. If you follow my projects, you probably know that I use them very often because they are very quick to assemble. I can build one set in 30-40 minutes. For me it's an incredible time saver. And I am not saying this because it's an advertisement for the producer and the product, but it's true. I set the links that weren't used to prepare short pieces for additional armor for the front of the vehicle. Pre-assembled, they give an immediate view of the final appearance of the model. Another great set is Panzer by Master Model. Just take the parts out of the box, assemble them into one element and put it in the model. Simple as always. Okay, let's continue building. In all vehicles on the Panzer IV chassis I try to replace the springs on the mudguards. It's better for me to build this element from scratch than to add a plastic stick with a poorly visible detail. Drilling the holes is quite difficult because you have to do it with a thin drill and it's easy to break them. Of course it happens to me in this model. Making the spring is very simple because you just have to wind the wire on the thin drill or a thicker wire. You can do it manually or mechanically using a Tamiya drill. Its speed is sufficient to properly direct the winding of the wire. Subsequent cutting, shaping and putting on the glued in thin sticks is simple and all you need is steady hand and a bit of glue to hold them in place. It's time for another set from Master Model. The antenna I used here is an early pattern with a movable socket. This set includes printed and metal elements. Building this one is very easy and intuitive, and the final effect is amazing. It's nothing special, but I'm going to add the commander figures, so the hatch needs to be open. For the third time I'm taking a set from Master Model. This time it will be the end of the machine gun barrel. I glue it with black glue from VMS. It's nice that the producer added a metal barrel to the set. After assembly it just needs to be slightly sanded before painting. I glued the entire gun section to the turret but left it movable. Truly speaking, it doesn't really matter because no one will play with it. Now all that's left is to complete the turret skirts. There are many sets on the market from which we can build them. This one was bought as a bargain some time ago and was waiting for its turn. I have had experience with these manufacturers' products before and I remember them rather fondly. Here we have one sheet of metal and a piece of wire plus photos of the finished set and instructions explaining the order of construction. Just a typical package content. Before I started working on this set I sanded down the entire sheet of metal. This way I have better glue adhesion. I don't intend to solder this set due to the large number of small parts. Besides, I'm lazy as a cat after eating a can of food. All elements also require sanding after cutting out of the metal plate. Despite previously sanding action, I additionally sand some elements with thick sandpaper. I did this primarily on the supports because they take the main stresses and have to hold the covers tightly. The rear skirts are bent, so to make my life easier I heated them thoroughly with a torch and then rolled them with a tool from RP Tools. And after a dozen or so hours the turret is already properly equipped. It looks great just like the entire model. What do you think about it? It's worth adding all these extra sets to achieve such an effect? I'm waiting for your opinions. So now after building is 100% completed I can start working with the painting. Of course first I removed all the parts that can be painted separately. There weren't many of them and I had models from which I removed much more parts. I attached all the wheels to wooden sticks and I mounted the spare tracks on pieces of blue tack to a paper painting handle. By the way, I made it from pieces of the model box and it's been working great for a few years. It may not look super duper, but its operating rate is 100% efficiency. For the hull and the turret I prepared 2 screws to glue as a handle. Of course, for better adhesion I first sanded them on one side. Another simple and effective way to make your modeling life easier. If you know my channel, it probably doesn't surprise you that now I use model degreaser to clean the model. Its effect is important to me because thanks to this product I don't have to worry about problems with a dirty surface. After a few minutes the model is ready to paint, but before I start doing anything else I cover all the elements with a metal primer. Such large parts as the side covers and the gun barrel, as well as the towing cables, require a good approach. I prefer not to meet later problems with the adhesion of the primer or paint. Although the product packaging indicates the use of a brush, it can be safely applied with an airbrush, which will significantly speed up the work, and we can also be sure that the product is applied evenly. Now you can see the wheels painting, but I need to say a word about trucks painting you have had on your screens couple seconds ago. It was a special mix for trucks that I have prepared in a special jar. It's a mix of RC colors paints, brown, black and a bit of silver. All this gives a very dark brown with a slight metallic tint, which I use to give a base color for trucks in armored vehicle, especially from the period of World War II. The first color on the wheels and also on the bottom of the hull and fenders is oxide red primer. It won't be visible, but for variety and logical thinking these places could have been left unpainted by factory workers or soldiers in field workshops. So, as you can see right now, I use the quick wheel mask for painting. Of course, I'm sure that someone will appear in the comments who uses a plastic stencil with different wheel sizes. I've explained this many times, but I will do it again. Comparing this mask and the plastic stencil is like trying to start a DU Matisse in the Paris-Dakar rally. You can, but you know. The masks are prepared with a fraction of 1 mm precision for specific wheels from a specific set and producer. The plastic stencil has wheel diameters every 1 mm, so if you want to paint the wheels precisely, think about what will be a better tool for this purpose. I hope that my clarification is simple. Having the paint already prepared, I painted the entire model in the base color. Nothing great or sophisticated, just dark yellow base color. After finishing the painting, I applied some glossy varnish as a base for applying the markings. I used the stickers from the set for this. In the end they won't be visible, but it's worth doing everything carefully. Each sticker was treated with a softener. Now it's time to paint the details. Starting with the drive and idler wheels, I added some silver to the places where they contact with the tracks. This is my standard procedure that I perform on all armored vehicles I build. I painted the tools in various shades, using mainly dark brown and grey for the metal elements and sandy shades for the wooden parts. If you want to ask why I don't paint the grain on the wooden handles, I will tell you that in my opinion it's a modeling exaggeration. I don't criticize those who paint them, especially in larger scales, but in 35th painting them is unnecessary in my opinion. It's enough to stain the wooden elements appropriately to make it look good. I apply several very thin layers to give them depth and different intensity of color. Shit happens, I would like to say. I noticed this failure only now. As you can see, the fire extinguisher cracked through the pin it was placed on. I was a bit surprised, but I will have to mask it somehow at a later stage. Okay, going back to the painting, it needs to be said that it's good to use a pencil to slightly silver the metal elements, exactly as I do it here. It's not as intense as painting with paint, but visible enough to have no doubt that it's a metal element. I also added a bit of rusty shade to the metal elements very subtly without significantly coloring the elements. A bit more of the rusty shade, or rather shades, were applied to the spare pieces of trucks which serve as an additional armor. In total there were 4 shades from the Pigment Jacket series applied wet on wet. I diluted them with a universal weathering carrier. Generally, knowing that they would be painted mostly white in the end, I used this stage more for fun than for creating great looking effects, although even so it looks super realistic. After the paints had completely dried, I arranged all the pieces of trucks on the model and glued them to the hull. To add realism and common sense, I prepared a piece of thin wire and started tying it, imitating the attachment of the trucks to the hull. This piece of wire was previously soaked in blackening metal liquid, so don't be surprised that it's not perfectly silver but more grey. Properly braiding the wire takes some time because I always try to do it as realistically as possible and think about how a soldier would arrange it doing this task. Contrary to appearances, it may seem quite simple, but sometimes it's quite a puzzle how to use vehicle elements or their lack to arrange the wire properly. The next step was to cover the entire model with chipping medium as the first layer under the white camo. I think I applied 2 thin layers, which turned out to be sufficient for the whole process. To make the white mixture I used flat white, glossy white and deck tan. All of them from Tamiya, of course. The mixture of matte and glossy colors is intended to give a satin finish, and a bit of deck tan is to slightly tone down the brightness of the color. The mixture prepared in this way is kind of dirty, which will perfectly match the vehicle. I painted the entire model and covered all the most exposed surfaces. In this way, some places were only delicately dusted with paint, but it didn't bother me at all. In fact, it was advisable. Also, all the work I did on the details was covered, but in a moment in some places it will be visible again when they start to wash off the white camo. To wash off the paint I used tap water and various tools to give the paint damage different shapes. My goal was to leave the vehicle in white camo but with visible damage and a slightly visible base coat. I applied the stickers with crosses and numbers in exactly the same places as before. They look a little different, but that doesn't bother me at all. Of course, they were all treated the same way with a softener. Before I started doing the basic wash, I first applied a delicate light grey filter to the model's surface. This slightly toned down the white of the paint and gave it a slightly tired look for the winter camo. Of course, it's better to do it in thin layers that will dry quickly than to apply a lot of paint in one place, because it certainly won't make it look better. After the filter dried, I started applying white oil paint, the irregular spots of which were very clear against the filtered camo background. You can use different brushes and different color intensity here. All this will ultimately lead to building interesting effects on the paint surface and will additionally contrast with the previous applied layers. The whole process takes some time, but the big advantage is that we can divide it into several stages, because oil paint doesn't dry as quickly as acrylic paint. Additionally, stepping away from the model for a moment is always good, especially when we return to work on it after a break and can look at the effects of our previous work with distance. In addition to painting with oil paint, I also used acrylic paint to prepare small spots. This way I brightened details such as screws or edges, but also added the imitation of delicate scratches on the armor. All the work I've done on the white camo is to create an interesting surface that highlights individual parts of the model. Go back to when I applied the first coat of camo and count how many effects have appeared on that paint so far. After painting the bright areas, I started applying a base wash to highlight the details. I choose a black and brown color, which doesn't really matter because dark grey would look just as good on white camo. The most important thing is to create a visual illusion. The second important thing is the right surface to apply the wash to. It works best if it's glossy surface. Then the paint from which the wash is made, in this case it's oil or enamel, will spread nicely in the recesses using the surface tension and the shapes of the model. This will happen a bit slower and less efficiently on a satin surface, and the worst on matte one. In the latter case, making a wash will be very time consuming because the paint will soak into the camo surface, if it's painted with acrylic paints of course, and it will be difficult to remove the excess even if we do it almost immediately. Of course, I'm not saying that it's impossible to remove all unnecessary wash stains, but why make life difficult for yourself and waste time and nerves on washing off excess paint from a carefully selected camo color and perfectly made arrangement of camo blocks or other patterns. That is why I try to use a glossy varnish immediately after and before the decals to even out their surface and at the same time prepare a suitable base for applying the wash and subsequent effects. Just a couple seconds ago you have seen the removing the excess with thinner. I also speed up the work by using an accelerator. Remember, time is money unless you plan to build the model for a year. In addition to the standard use of wash to emphasize details on the model, I very often use it to paint dirt effects and streaks. Note how much product is applied to this place and how I arrange it using the thinner. Ultimately, after applying the turret, this place will be mostly covered, but it's still worth spending some time preparing it. The next step was to paint the dirty places with dark oil paints. I prefer shades of grey for this, which work perfectly in small quantities. They create great looking dirt in places most frequently visited by the crew and in places where dirt naturally collects during field work and is not wiped off by everyday use of the vehicle. And now it's a perfect time to mention my super patrons. It's become my tradition, but believe me, these are people worth mentioning in every episode. Massive thanks guys for your support. The people who helped me the most are Bulldog09, Christopher Obarski, Dale Etchison, Dan Dubois, Hans Zub, Peter L, Steve Enkin and the awesome Karsten Keddy. But the people listed just now are also my great patrons. Please don't forget that you can be one of them. And I realize it's not easy these days, but if you have a few bucks you could drop in my cup, that would be great. Thanks! Oh, and one more thing. Remember that if you join for free you probably won't be able to view my work. Better try the 7 days free trial, which will give you many more possibilities. Oil paints can also be used to paint fake shadows. A great example of this is the space under the additional pieces of tracks on the turret. You can see how the right paint distribution creates a delicate shadow. Looking at the side covers, we can say that they are a great place to use oil paints to paint streaks, dirt and shadows at once. Exactly all the effects I mentioned a moment ago. In this way we add variety to flat surfaces. It's worth spending some time to find good quality archive photos that show exactly what the surface of the vehicle looks like. Very often you can be very surprised to see the effects and their arrangements. But this stage has to be finished and I have to start applying winter matte to the lower parts of the model. I started by making a base of pigment jackeys, which I applied using an airbrush to the hull, suspension elements, wheels and tracks. As a result I have a nice dusty surface, which is a great start to further dirting. Generally I don't play with any subtleties when applying this product to the model. To create the right shade of matte I used 2 colors of pigment and alkyd binder. I tried to create an almost dry impression. After mixing all the ingredients I started applying them to the bottom of the hull, creating a matte layer. I also added a dry pigment for better texture. Notice that I apply all the matte in one direction, which is from the front to the back of the vehicle, exactly as it would happen in a real vehicle during off-road driving. Of course I realize that these effects will be very little visible, but I think that each element of the model should be prepared 100% so that there will be no surprise when someone somehow looks at the bottom of the model. I applied matte to the sides of the model using the same method, focusing on the area around the carriages. The wheels also received an appropriate portion of matte. Now I prepared darker matte simulating fresh and damp. I started applying it but in a smaller amount so that the model would show 2 shades covering the chassis elements. I started again from the bottom of the hull, breaking up the standard arrangement and speckling a bit. Additionally I painted damp traces on the joints of the armor plates, which looks very interesting. Maybe not necessarily in accordance with reality, but visually it looks very good in my opinion. By the way, in reality, if the vehicle was driving through fresh matte, it would look completely different and the entire chassis would be uniformly covered with a fresh layer of matte. But we all know that it would look bad on the model. And pleasing an eye is one of the main values of building vehicle models, so the choice is simple, at least for me. If someone prefers to do it differently, that's their business. The important thing is to have fun with it and spend time well, because unfortunately we can't get it back. As you probably noticed, the road wheels were also slightly dirty, as were the outer surfaces of the trucks. In their case I began further preparation for mounting on the model. This meant polishing all surfaces that had contact with the wheels. I used a pencil and a silicone tip which perfectly distributed the graphite on all the links. I also wrapped the most protruding edges on the outside with these tools. Of course, I didn't forget about the teeth of drive wheels and idler wheels. In this way I had both tracks ready to be applied quite quickly. After connecting them outside the model, I put them on the wheels and gently wrapped the edges with a silicone tip, adding a metallic shine. Now the model was standing on its own wheels. Using a metallic tool, I gently wrapped the front machine gun and some edges on the entire model, giving them a metallic look. This has to be done gently and in moderation, because too much can definitely harm the overall appearance of the model. Almost at the end I needed to cover that unfortunate crack that I showed in the episode about building this model. So I cut out a piece of paper tissue and soaked it in the appropriate liquid for arranging paper. After adding a few shades which were intended to generally dirty this imitation of the rack, I formed the initial shape and arranged it on the model. Just a few more touches of the brush with paint and this piece can be left to dry. It has undoubtedly done its job. Finally, I prepared a bucket of potatoes. For this purpose I used mustard seeds, which I threw into the bucket and poured with diluted PVA glue. I removed the excess of the glue with a paper tissue. The whole work was not complicated and took literally a moment. After drying I started painting it in the shades of brown. I used dark brown to make a wash and lighter colors to highlight the shapes of the potatoes. In the end, a few greasy spots on the engine part painted with diluted oil paint completed the look of the model. Of course, greasy spots also appeared on the wheels, which beautifully enriched the muddy look of the chassis. I'm a lazy cat, so there will be no summary. Everyone can see how the model looks, so I leave the evaluation and conclusions of the model to you. But if you had a good time watching it, please like, comment and subscribe to the channel for more videos with my projects. As I said before, you can also consider joining my Patreon group, because you can find there daily reports from my workshop, even if I don't broadcast regular videos on YouTube. Please remember that your support if you join is highly appreciated and helps me do what I do here at coldemonspl. Thanks to this I will try to give you some interesting content to keep you informed and entertained. And a short note for the collectors: all my models are for sale. Get in touch with me and we will discuss what you need, or just ask what I have for sale. This one presented here is also for sale and I will be happy if it becomes part of some collection. That's all for today, see you next time, cheers!